Hey everybody, Garry Adelman, American Battlefield Trust with Andy Poulton behind the camera there. We go to a lot of museums and you tell us, you vote with your fingers and click on things and tell us that you like seeing objects and artifacts. And here we are at one of the best privately held collections you might see anywhere. And there's so much stuff in here. We could spend 20 hours filming in here and not be out. But we're going to walk around a little bit and show you some stuff from around here and start with things near and dear to us. And let me introduce our good friend, Dave Malgee. He's a good friend of the American Battlefield Trust. This is his collection. Thanks so much for having us.
Oh, wow.
Dave.
Thanks for being here, Gary. It's really an honor.
All right. So I know, and right away our eyes and our members' eyes will probably go over to the fact that you have some things that are associated with General Lee's headquarters here at Gettysburg.
I do, and actually we're standing right here by those artifacts, and I want to first of all call attention to the print here that shows the headquarters. It's John Paul Strain's print of Lee's headquarters, which the Battlefield Trust has preserved, and I do have a few things from that I think that are pertinent. Okay, a lot of people wonder, you know, how much did Lee use the headquarters? Well, I do have a letter here from a gentleman, Sergeant Gander, who was a scout in the 39th Battalion of Virginia Cavalry, and it was he attests to in this letter, that placed the guards around Lee's headquarters and actually saw the generals come and meet with Lee during the Battle of Gettysburg. Now, we know it was under fire during the battle, and in fact, here's a piece of wood that came off one of the outbuildings at Lee's headquarters. That came straight out of the old Lee's headquarters museum.
Now, let me jump in for a second, too, because it's interesting, that letter you just broke out. You know, it's Lee's headquarters. The earliest maps show it as Lee's headquarters. We have multiple accounts that say that Lee used the house. Now, where he slept and where his tent was becomes a little bit more controversial, but people have tended, in my opinion, to focus on all the evidence written in like 1910, 1920, or even later sometimes, but referring back to the 1880s, where they claim that his headquarters might have been somewhere else. The fact is, we don't know where Lee's headquarters tent was, but here we have an example of confirming the house was used as the headquarters, or at least used in the earliest maps. I'll show that.
Yes, and in fairness, it was written in 1913 during the 50th reunion. So, but I've always been told, and I know you and I disagree on this, I've always heard that his headquarters tent was actually across the street in the apple orchard.
Yeah.
That may not be factual.
Let me just do it for a quick sec here. Okay, because here we know this. A man who was not at the Battle of Gettysburg said that he talked to somebody who said he talked to somebody who talked to a woman at the site that said she owned the house during the battle. This was in 1880, they said it was. Mary Thompson was already dead. And they said, the three away, said that she said that Lee said that it was across the street in an apple orchard, okay? Later, when the government put up the headquarters marker, they went and attributed that quote to Lee. My headquarters were in an apple orchard behind the seminary. So it's fourth-hand evidence that as to where it is. I don't know where the tent was, but I don't buy that account.
All right. Regardless of where the tent was, Gary, I have something that is related to his headquarters that I think is very cool.
I'll open this for you here.
All right. All right. So what we have here is a piece of the door that was reportedly taken off the Widow Thompson house, Lee's headquarters today, and it's been cut up as a souvenir, and this was used, again, purportedly, and there's several of these pieces around the area with the same patina, the same story. This happened to be in a couple of local museums, but supposedly he put this door on a couple of barrels and laid out that 1858 map of Adams County and some of the other larger maps that he had to help conduct the battle. So pretty impressive relic, and you can see the whitewash from the interior of the door still. So pretty amazing stuff.
Can we turn that around one more time?
Oh, yes.
Let me just say, too, that's the last Lee's headquarters piece right here. Is that right?
Yes.
So let me just say with this that before the trust purchased Lee's headquarters, it was a museum, it was a motel, it was a restaurant and everything like that. And the owners of the hotel who decided to sell to us were particular about donating the collection to us after they sold off some of those pieces. So that's how some of these items ended up in private collections. And then the trust donated a lot of those pieces that we received to the park, and then sold things that weren't associated with any particular part of the house off on the market to help pay for the restoration.
And if this is pertinent, Gary, I'm very fortunate that I was the individual that was chosen to have first choice at some of those artifacts before they went to auction, because the family did want to realize some upfront money before the auction,
Good,
which
good.
took some time.
And
So-
we are lucky you take such good care of your stuff. So there's more to see. We'll be back in a sec. Now, here's a piece that looks cool, but I had no idea what it actually was until you explained it, Dave.
All right, so this really is a cool piece, and it ties into the events here in Gettysburg on July 1st of 1863, the first day of the battle. This is, in fact, a 27-foot long patriotic banner, and it has 35 stars, which represents the fact, it signifies that West Virginia had just come into the Union, and this was going to be flown in celebration for that, and it was. Now, on June 26th, when Jubal Early came through and he took the town flag, this was all that the city fathers had to fly from the town square, as you pointed out, which is really a circle, but they call it a diamond.
Well done.
Or vice versa. Yeah, whatever. At any rate, David Kendallhart, who was the head of the Borough Council, actually flew this on July 1st, but he quickly took it down. And this is his own attest to that. He said that he felt that it was drawing Confederate artillery fire on the town square. So for 100 years, this was it was in Lee's headquarters museum. And it's, I think, just a wonderful, wonderful artifact, a witness to those events of July 1st, 1863.
Excellent. Many of you have seen photos of the human carnage on a battlefield, including at Gettysburg, and you can sort of see some crude markings. They have been in Antietam too. They're often hard to read. They are sometimes scrawled in. Some seem to have been done in pencil, but here I'm looking at an object, something carefully painted, something with a nice thick board, something with a nice top piece of board on here. It is the finest example I've seen of what we call a temporary grave marker. Dave?
Yeah, this is very, very rare. It's one of only a few that are known to exist. This was in, for those of you that know the Strange and Blighted Land, Greg Coco's book. It was recently on display at the National Park Service for several years, and which speaks to its rarity. Frank Goodrich was an officer in the 2nd U.S. who was killed in the wheat field, as you can see, and this is preserved the way it is for a legitimate reason, and that is that a neighboring civilian by the name of David Weichert went out after the battle and helped bury the dead. And David would attest to the fact, he was 21 years old in 1863, he would attest to the fact that this was the first marker that he saw erected on the battlefield. Now, very quickly, the body of Frank Goodrich was exhumed and sent up to New England for burial. His father was a judge, very wealthy, and so that's why Weichert was able to retrieve this headboard in the condition it's in, and then he saved it because he said it was the first one he ever saw erected. So that's quite a story, I think. And just a note on Frank Goodrich, you know, the guy was well loved, which explains, I think, the quality of this headboard. You can see the nail holes where it was taken off perhaps a local building nearby, and then the rain guard up above. Well-liked guy, although he'd been court-martialed twice before Gettysburg, which is another story for another day.
And I think what Dave just got at is that this is a temporary, this is a battlefield grave. Most people in the Civil War, if they died on a battlefield, they dug a hole next to you and put you in it. And if you were lucky, you ended up with something like this that might identify you for when you're moved to a new national cemetery or a church cemetery or sent home or something like that. And this is just testament to the quote that talks about how he's a member of the U.S. Regulars, and for 2 years, the U.S. Regulars taught us how to be soldiers. But in the wheat field at Gettysburg, they taught us how to die like soldiers.
David, we moved from one corner of your room to the next and to a piece of a Confederate flag. I think this catches your eye as you come along here. You're looking, here's uniforms, here's guns, and now here's this section of a Confederate flag. Can you tell us why you have this and the story behind it?
Well, sure. This is a third issue bunting Army of Northern Virginia infantry flag, although it was assigned to an artillery unit in A.P. Hill's Corps. Originally, they were known as the Purcell Artillery out of Richmond. Their battery commander was William Pigram, and he would go on to command the battalion, and he would take their original silk flag with him as battalion colors. So they needed a new flag, and they got this probably not too far before the Battle of Gettysburg, I would think. And it is at Gettysburg, this unit was known as McGraw's Battery. Again, it's an A.P. Hill's Corps, and they'll participate in fighting on the first day. Also, they'll participate in the bombardment prior to Pickett's charge. The reason we have a piece of it is that this flag would actually make it through the war and will be captured on April 2nd, 1865 at the fall of Petersburg. But the reason that the flag is not whole is because a lieutenant serving in the Provost Guard, 1st Massachusetts Cavalry, Company C, would come along and he wanted a souvenir, so he cut this piece out of the flag, although it had nothing to do with the capture. It will end up in a private museum in Massachusetts, eventually be deaccessioned, it'll come into the collector's market, and the reason we know which battery had this flag is that, I don't know if the viewers can see this, but you can see the slight remains of battle honors on this flag. The middle battle honor right here, if you look closely, it says Fauquier Springs, which is a small battle. It involved predominantly artillery units as far as I know. And the gentleman that had this before me took that flag with the Battle of Honors and went to Richmond to the Museum of the Confederacy, which is a repository of all the flags returned to Virginia in 1905 from the War Department. And he said, do you have any flags of units that are at Fauquier Springs? And guess what? They pulled out this, which blows me away, Kris. I mean, here it is. They pieced it together. They signed off on it at the Museum of the Confederacy. And they're not interested in it right now because it's hard to even, they've got so many flags, it's hard to preserve them all.
Yeah.
And they'd rather have it, you know, in private hands than be responsible for it to just deteriorate away. And they do a great job. I don't want anybody to think that they don't. It's just overwhelming. But what a witness to Gettysburg, a well-known battery, and a great story behind it. So one of my prized artifacts.
Yeah, I think it's something that people don't understand, how difficult it is actually to care for some of these. Now, this is basically a wool flag. We have cotton flags. We also have silk flags. So to try to care for those over the years. We did a video actually in the Mississippi State Archives a few years ago talking about the flag conservation, how long it takes, what goes through it. So check that out on our YouTube channel. The other thing I just wanted to point out real fast, Willie Pegram, who is killed April 1st, 1865 at the Battle of Five Forks. We just did a video right where he died, actually, just a few months ago out there at Five Forks. That first flag that I wish you had that he took up to headquarters, he actually wrapped himself in that at the Battle of Fredericksburg when his artillery battery ran off the field during a bombardment on December 13th. He went over, grabbed the flag, wrapped himself in it, and shamed his men into coming back up onto the line and
Wow.
started fighting there. So this is their second flag. And I think the story is fascinating to see how these guys wanted souvenirs, and then in the end, how you were able to put the two back together and show us that. So this is a piece of history that is literally a piece of a flag, and the other part of it is down in Richmond.
Everybody seems to be personally drawn to different type of objects. I've seen people be drawn to guns or artillery implements, cannonballs, hats, or anything like that. For my part, I always find myself being drawn to gauntlets or gloves. And these were at Gettysburg. This is Andrew L. Bush. He's a lieutenant, and he was in the 37th Massachusetts on the south end of the battlefield. And I just imagine what he held with these, and that his actual hands were in them. And you can see, you know, sort of the use on the gloves as well, and more so, if I can use the glove to point, that he was wounded at Gettysburg, and there are blood stains actually up near the wrist over here. So because, you know, your hands are implements of your military career, I've always been drawn to items like this.
David, we're still making our way through your amazing collection, and this corner here seems to be dedicated to one officer. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, he's one of my favorite soldiers in the Civil War. Grew up near, he lived where I grew up. His name was Eliakim Sherrill. He commanded the 126th New York throughout much of his year in service, or just slightly less than a year. But at Gettysburg, he took over Willard's brigade after Willard was killed on July 2nd. So he commanded 4 regiments here. But his story is pretty amazing. He's a former U.S. congressman. He's a former New York State senator. He becomes colonel of this new regiment in August of 1862. He goes to Harper's Ferry while everybody else is being paroled. As captured prisoners by the Confederates there. He is in the hospital because the day before, 2 days before the surrender at Harper's Ferry on September 15th of 1862, he is shot through one side of his face. The bullet comes out the other side of his face. He loses all of his lower teeth, and his tongue is bleeding profusely. It will take something like 15 or 20 days before they can actually figure out what the cause of source of all that bleeding is. And in early October, in fact, he will be operated on, and they will find out that one of his teeth had embedded in the very, very rear of his tongue, very low, and it had severed an artery. So they operate on him, they get him back into health, and he comes back into the Army in January '63, although he's nearly 50 years old. He'll be 50 the next month. And then he comes to Gettysburg in command of the Harper's Ferry Cowards, this group of 4 regiments that all surrendered at Harper's Ferry. And actually on July 2nd, I won't go into all the details, but he's actually placed under arrest when he's in command of the brigade. And he'll be restored to the command by General Hancock on the morning of July 3rd. Seemingly his luck is changing, but at the height of Pickett's charge, somewhere between 4 and 5, according to the different reports, p.m., he will take a bullet to the abdomen. And he will die the next day at the George Spangler farm. And what we have here, Kris, are a number of his artifacts, including his headquarters flag that he had here at Gettysburg, a dress frock coat, and his campaign hat. This frock coat was made in May of 1863. This is also his saddle blanket. All it's been heavily restored. A lot of it is original. It's such a rare artifact. And then, of course, in the case here, we'll take a look at some of his even more personal artifacts as well.
Yeah, David, we're looking here, the campaign hat that you picked up earlier. I mean, it's in fantastic shape. You can still see, if you don't mind, if I...
Oh, no, by all means.
You can still see the lining inside of it, just how handmade it was around the leather here, the leather band, and how it's tied together in the back. You can see basically the silk insulation that's inside of it. It's in fantastic condition here. And then we noted before we started filming just the size of his shoulder boards on his double-breasted frock coat. And this is the frock coat is made as an officer. He would have to have this made by himself or by a tailor. And the quality of the material is just first class.
And I might say that he was a fairly wealthy man. He'd been a tanner up in New York State by trade, and he'd made a lot of money at that. And he was very humble, strangely enough. But you know, the quality of his appointments here is pretty amazing.
Yeah,
for sure.
And before we open up the case, you did point out over here with the General Hospital from the Siege of Harper's Ferry, 1862, that we have a list of the wounded from the 126 New York, and then at the top there is his name, shot in the mouth. So that's a pretty cool memento, or at least a reminder of all of these guys. I shouldn't say cool, but it's a very unique breakdown. You can see who's wounded, who's killed, who's discharged from service, wounded. I mean, it's an amazing artifact.
And there's a second page to it, the flip side. And you know, I've been trying to document the casualties at Harper's Ferry for a long time, as have a number of other historians. Mm-hmm. And this is the closest I think I can come to an original document related to that. So I was pretty excited to get this a couple weeks ago, actually. It's pretty new.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And almost everything was done in triplicate in the Army, so that we would have, usually a regiment would keep something, the hospital would keep something, the War Department. You would have sometimes 3 copies of it, but you only have 1 sometimes that remain.
But could I make a point
Yeah.
here? Because you're a professional historian, I'm an amateur historian, and everything leads to something else. I had never heard of West Buildings in Baltimore. And I went and looked at that, a series of warehouses that have been turned into the hospital, and this is where these guys were. So, you know, one thing leads to another, and slowly our wealth of information just expands. And that's what I like about collecting, because I always learn something new with every artifact.
And Baltimore was so much a city of hospitals during the Antietam campaign, Gettysburg campaign. And I learned about my ancestor who was taken to the University Hospital, which is up by Johns Hopkins today, who was taken there after the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's how I knew a little bit more about them. That's an awesome piece that'll teach you a little bit, because David, that's the first thing he pointed out was the West Buildings, and he started telling us about that. Now, a few of the items down here, let's take a look at inside of the case. And these are all owned or worn by Sherrill, correct?
Yes. First of all, let me just say that the vest and the pants were part of this uniform grouping that he received actually during the Battle of Chancellorsville. They were not engaged. I think he bought it in Washington.
Yeah, they would have been stationed in Washington
Yeah.
under General Hayes.
Yeah, so so they came with this frock coat. But what you see here that I think he had at Gettysburg, undoubtedly, is his binoculars in their case. And note that the strap has been shortened so can be draped over the pommel of his horse. His spurs and his weather-worn, weather-beaten shoulder boards.
And they look like they've been cut off of the uniform. Looks like there's fabric remnants there.
I believe that this was sent home to his widow, Emily, after his death. They would not have sent his bloodied uniform home, but I don't believe they would have. At any rate, so there's this camp slippers here in the lower right-hand corner.
I was just commenting to David before we started filming that PGT Beauregard, a Confederate general, has a very similar set of camp slippers that he would have worn. And you could check out one of our videos from the Confederate collection in New Orleans.
And I don't know if your viewers can see this very well, but the CDV on the carte de visite on the right, the viewer's left, is Sherrill when he became colonel in July of 1862. The regiment was mustered in August of 62. And then on the left is his post-wound photograph. And you can see how the shape of his face changed, I think, as a result of that terrible wound through both cheeks. So that's Eliakim Sherrill.
And finally, David, I just want to point out the tassels here. You said that these tassels could have been the tassels from the first flag of the 126 that was captured in Harper's Ferry. It's the largest surrender of U.S. forces from 1862 up until 1942 when we surrender at Corregidor out in the Philippines.
Yes, if your viewers would like to see the flag, they can find it at Harper's Ferry. It's in pristine condition because it was only given to the regiment, presented to the regiment by the ladies of Penn Yan, New York. Again in August of 62, and they surrender the flag in September 15th of 62. I believe the eagle that is next to it, the eagle finial, I believe was adorning the flagpole of his headquarters flag. It's just not of the quality it would be on a regimental flag. But anyway, Sherrill's an interesting guy, and wow, you can almost touch his life, certainly his death, through some of these artifacts. It's pretty amazing. And to be the caretaker, that blows me away, honestly.
It's very special. I mean, especially a unit that saw a lot of action on July 2nd, on July 3rd here at Gettysburg.
Some of your viewers probably have heard this story, but you know, Hancock was also wounded at the height of Pickett's charge. He goes home to Newtown, Pennsylvania. He's recovering, and he's visited by his West Point classmate, Alexander Hayes, who is the division commander under whom Sherrill serves. And remember, it was Hancock that had removed Sherrill from command and then placed him back in command. And during the course of their conversation, Hancock will matter-of-factly say to General Hayes, whatever happened to that colonel I had arrested at Gettysburg? And Hayes, being a good friend, can talk to Hancock like this. He said, Hancock, it's like all your damned apologies. It comes too late. Sherrill is dead. Pretty sad exclamation point on the story. Oftentimes people come and they ask me what's my favorite artifact, and let's face it, I couldn't pick out one, but I would like to say that I have favorite artifacts that aren't the real flashy ones. They're not going to jump out at anybody. And one that I would like to show you, that's one of my favorites, is right up here, Andy. It's a New York militia belt plate. The tag you see is attached to the buckle, to the plate, and it represents the collection of the GAR post in Hagerstown, Maryland, which had it before it came onto the market. What I like about this is it's the property of the highest ranking officer in the Excelsior Brigade killed at Gettysburg. His name was Captain Eugene Shine. He's from Manhattan. He's 31 years old at Gettysburg. He's got a young child named Ambrose. He may have never laid eyes on Ambrose before he was killed in the peach orchard on July 2nd of 1863. Shine, his body will be returned to New York. He actually was a volunteer fireman in New York City. So Engine Company 31 will receive his body. It'll lay in state at the mayor's mansion, and he'll be buried in Calvary Cemetery, which for your viewers, if they don't know it, that was the scene of all the funerals in the Godfather movies. But anyway, Shine is quite a character, and that little baby boy, Ambrose, will grow up to be a priest, I believe an Episcopal priest in the Hudson River Valley. And he will be invited back to Gettysburg in 1897 when the monument to the 73rd New York, also known as the 2nd New York Fire Zouaves, will be dedicated in Excelsior Field near the Peach Orchard, and it will be Ambrose Shine who provides the invocation that opens the dedication of the monument in 1897. I just think that's kind of a full circle story. Father dies here, and a child that never knew him comes back and participates in the dedication of the monument to his father's regiment. I love it.
This is a piece of history that most people would not even know what's in here. This is a business ledger from one of the Gettysburg hotels, opened in 1869, and actually sat on land that was preserved by the American Battlefield Trust. The Gettysburg Springs Hotel was opened in 1869, and it was a veritable who's who of Union officers coming back to this place. And so signing in at the front desk were officers such as George Sears Green, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, John Newton, the First Corps commander after the fall of John Reynolds, and many others. But one name that stuck out to me was Francis Ursch. Ursch, whose name is signed underneath George von Almsberg, who commanded the 74th Pennsylvania here at Gettysburg and then later Schimmelpfennig's brigade. Ursch earned his Medal of Honor here at Gettysburg. He fought a rearguard action into the town, and near the Eagle Hotel, the commodious Eagle Hotel, which is today a 7-Eleven, he and his men are going to put up a perfect fortification, and rather than surrender all of their arms to the Confederates after cornered on the retreat on the first day at Gettysburg, threw all of their arms down into the well there at Gettysburg, and then is going to be marched off to Libby Prison, where he escapes. Later on in life, he is going to really relive the Civil War and have what we would consider today post-traumatic stress disorder. It's going to ravage his marriage, and he is going to also become an alcoholic later on in life. And as David, who owns this collection here, pointed out, he even went on to Sing Sing Prison, where he also escaped from Sing Sing Prison in New York. Ursch is just one of many names here, and I think that this is a perfect example of what happens to these men after the war. You can see in their own handwriting their names, their rank, what they did here at Gettysburg. This is 4 years removed from the battle, and then maybe where they lived. Some of them put where they lived at that time. So this is a reminder of who they were at the time of Gettysburg and then what they were turning into in their post-war careers. A fascinating piece of history with more than 73 signatures here of Union officers coming back here to Gettysburg in 1869.
All right, Dave, I am holding an edged weapon in my hand. What's the story of this?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite weapons in the entire collection. What you're holding is an 1850 Field and Staff sword that was the property of Captain Thomas Livermore of the 5th New Hampshire. And Livermore's story is that the night before the Battle of Gettysburg, June 30th, he is going to be taken out of the regiment and assigned as the head of the 2nd Corps ambulance train. So that's going to be his responsibility on the bloodiest day of bloodiest battle of the war. And the story goes, and this is Livermore's own account, that on the way to Gettysburg, he broke his sword. He doesn't tell us how he broke it. But what he does say is that he had a very dear friend, a young lieutenant named Charles Hale, who had just been assigned to the staff of Colonel Edward Cross, who was now a brigade commander. And Hale apparently had a leather scabbard, where Livermore had a metallic scabbard. And so he thought he'd play this trick on his friend. He said, "Hey, Charles, why don't you give me your sword and I'll give you mine, and that's more appropriate for a staff officer." And the trusting Lieutenant Hale simply took the sword, thanked him, and it wasn't until July 2nd in the wheat field that Hale was taking prisoners, Confederate prisoners, out of the wheat field when he drew his sword, only to find out, draw it, Gary, draw it, only to find out that it was broken. He supposedly threw it away. Everybody thought it was very funny, and then it suddenly, as you might expect, disappears from history. 20 years after the battle, Thomas Livermore visits the battlefield. And he actually finds his sword in the collection of a local doctor. Then it disappears again from history. Then in the late 1990s, one of the employees at Lee's Headquarters Museum was reading Livermore's account about the broken sword and the trick he played on Hale. And he said, you know what, we have a broken sword in our collection. And when he looked at it, and guess what? On the pommel of the sword, which you probably won't be able to see, Andy, but on the pommel it says Lieutenant T.L. Livermore. Wow. And I just think that's a great story, and it shows the humanity of soldiers too, that they're, even though they're facing serious issues with battles and disease and everything else, they can still have fun.
And that even Hale considered it funny. And could you imagine being this guy who worked at Lee's Headquarters Museum and suspecting, hey, that's a broken sword, and then finding this? This is one of the reasons so many of us are obsessed with this subject.
And let me say one more thing. There's kind of an epilogue to this whole thing, and that is that Livermore will go on to write the famous source book on numbers and losses in the American Civil War. And this will be the Bible for historians doing research on casualties. And Charles Hale, the young lieutenant, will actually become associated with the artist Philip Petau, who is working on the cyclorama of the Battle of Gettysburg. He'll actually lecture on that. Eventually he'll move to Gettysburg. He'll become a licensed battlefield guide, and then he'll die at a soldier's home in Milwaukee a few years later.
If I may, Dave, licensed battlefield guide Hale or Adelman or Smith or Hessler, others couldn't have told it better.
David, we've moved around your room again, where we haven't moved far, but you have a large number of arms and artifacts down here. And one that you're standing here just has a fantastic story that's tied to a number of soldiers, both north and south. Can you tell us a little bit about this rifle that you're holding?
Yeah, well, I think most of the people watching have heard of Eli Whitney and his development, invention of the cotton gin, but he also had an arms company. Now, by the Civil War, he's dead, and his son, Eli Jr., has taken over the business. This happens to be a Whitney, an 1855 Whitney high hump rifle made in 1861. And it was issued to the troops of the 8th Connecticut. And part of the reason we know that is that stamped into the stock, now it would be upside down, unfortunately for the camera, Andy, it's 8CV, which stands for 8th Connecticut Volunteers, and then the letter F for Company F, and the number 31. Which represents that this was issued to the 31st man on the roster of Company F, 8th Connecticut. His name was Thomas L. Green. Now, Private Green will carry this gun to Antietam, and they will cross Antietam Creek, and late in the afternoon of September 17th, in the face of a severe Confederate counterattack, the 8th Connecticut will retreat back across Antietam Creek. They did not cross the bridge, by the way. They crossed the creek itself. And Thomas Green will drop this weapon. Probably late in the evening of September 17th or early on the morning of the 18th, it will be picked up by Confederates. It will be sent back to Richmond, checked out, and then it will be reissued to a soldier who's in the 18th Virginia, and his name is Booker F. Hunt. Now, Booker Hunt will carry this rifle to Pennsylvania, and he will be in Pickett's charge. He's in Pickett's division, Garnett's brigade, and he will be slightly wounded. And then he will drop this rifle as he retreats back. He will be captured, actually. But it will be picked up either by scavengers or relic hunters or the government people that are cleaning up the battlefield, and it will disappear from history. But we'll fast forward Kris, to 1973 in Dayton, Ohio, at a VFW post. There's a reunion being held for the 332nd Field Artillery Battalion, a World War II unit. And on that occasion, this gun, a witness to Antietam and Gettysburg, will be given away as a door prize. The winning ticket, number 45, will go to a fellow named Sterling Strawbaugh of Battery B. And he probably said at the time, what the heck am I going to do with this gun? But it speaks to a couple things. One is, even in the 70s, when I had just graduated from high school, this wasn't worth a whole lot of money back in those days. But to me, the value isn't ever in what somebody would pay for it, but rather it's witness to key historical events. And it's tied to a Union soldier and a Confederate soldier. And honestly, that just blows me away.
And it's probably picked up off of land saved by the American Battlefield Trust at Antietam. The 8th Connecticut, they're seeing their first action. They're part of the emergency of 1862 when Lee starts pushing across the Potomac, and you have Bragg going up into Kentucky, thrown together, thrown onto the front lines, thrown into action against some of the best troops in the Confederacy, and it does not go well for the 8th. But this gun has an amazing story and used in two of the most famous attacks and counterattacks in the American Civil War, and of course goes to a World War II veteran, and then finally makes it here to Shangri-La where David lives.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, Kris, the reason we know that Booker Hunt carried this into action is he actually engraved his name on the stock of the rifle. Again, it's upside down, so let me try to, maybe you can see it right there. I think it says B.F. Hunt.
What's always the fascinating piece is that you can get these soldiers to tie their stories right back to the artifact. And as David just pointed out, something that not common knowledge, I think, for most people, the Confederates would personalize a lot of their weapons and things. But the Union Army and the United States Army, it was against regulations to do so. Of course, some of the soldiers do that. Some of them will purchase their weapons after the war. They have the opportunity to do so. But it's far more common to find a Confederate to carve their name or their initials into their musket. I have one at home that same thing happened. It was a battlefield pickup from Manassas, and this Confederate who ended up with a United States musket ended up in the butt plate putting his initials into it so that we could figure out who it was.
Yeah, that's always cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So David, we really want to thank you for having us out here to Shangri-La and places unknown here somewhere in the state of Idaho, as Andy has pointed out, that this collection is just fantastic. I think we're going to be back at another point to look at a few other artifacts. We've also made some short videos that you'll see go up on our YouTube channel that just point out some other things that we didn't have time to show you because we could spend literally days down here telling these stories through these artifacts. And David, is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, all I'd like to say is it's a privilege for me to share these artifacts with people that care about the soldier experience. And I want to say how much I appreciate the work of the American Battlefield Trust, preservation work you're doing that will provide a place for future generations to feel what our history is all about, to walk the fields. It's awesome, and I just commend you guys for the work you're doing. Thank you for letting me be a part of it.
No, thank you, and you're a huge supporter of us, and he's brought these things right back out onto the battlefield where their stories were told, or you could see these things at former videos here on our YouTube channel, so do check those out. And on behalf of the American Battlefield Trust, please go over to our YouTube channel, Facebook, everywhere else, subscribe, click that like button, and tell your friends and your family about what we do. Check out battlefields.org to learn more about our organization, and of course, thank you for watching and supporting battlefield education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. Get inspired at battlefields.org.